My mother-in-law told everyone I couldn't have children. She wasn't ready for the doctor's announcement. The first time my mother-in-law announced that I could not have children, she did it while holding a champagne glass beneath a chandelier I had paid to restore. There were 43 people in the ballroom of Harrow House that night. I knew because I had spent 3 months turning the decaying family property into a venue for Daniel's parents' 40th anniversary. Marianne had accepted my work with satisfaction, but no gratitude. Dinner was nearly over when she stood. She thanked her friends, praised her husband, and described her 2 sons as her greatest achievements. Then she looked toward Daniel and me. She said the family had learned to accept certain disappointments. She said bloodlines did not always continue the way people hoped. She said she prayed Daniel would one day have the courage to choose a future instead of remaining trapped by misplaced loyalty. No one needed her to say my name. The room became so quiet that I heard ice settle in a glass 3 tables away. Daniel stared at the tablecloth. His older brother Andrew shifted in his chair. Andrew's wife looked at me with horrified sympathy. Marianne's closest friends lowered their eyes, but not before I saw recognition on their faces. This was not new information to them. It was only the first time she had delivered it while I was present. Then Marianne smiled and raised her glass. She asked everyone to toast to honest beginnings. I had spent 4 years protecting Daniel from that truth. 6 months earlier, after 2 years of negative pregnancy tests, early appointments, and calendars marked with private hope, we had completed a full fertility evaluation. My results showed no significant problem. Daniel's showed a severe obstruction caused by a childhood surgery his mother had never told him about. The specialist said there were options. A minor procedure could retrieve viable sperm, and in vitro fertilization gave us a real chance. Daniel had gone pale in the doctor's office. In the car, he'd begged me not to tell his family until he understood what he wanted to do. He had grown up in a house where Marianne treated vulnerability as evidence of defective character. I agreed because I loved him. I assumed privacy would give him room to recover. I did not understand that my silence would become the room where he hid. At Harrow House, every face turned toward us. Daniel still said nothing. I placed my napkin beside my plate. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I stood and thanked Marianne for the toast. I told the guests that private medical information was complicated and that public speculation rarely improved it. I wished her a happy anniversary. Then I walked out before my voice betrayed me. Daniel caught me in the old library. He closed the door and said his mother had gone too far. He sounded like a witness describing weather. I asked him how she knew we had been seeing a fertility specialist. His silence answered before he did. He admitted that he had told her we were having trouble. He claimed he had not blamed me. He said Marianne had drawn her own conclusions, and correcting her would have meant revealing his diagnosis. I asked how long she had been telling people I was infertile. He did not know. That was his first answer. When I asked again, he said perhaps 3 months. 3 months meant birthday lunches, church committees, golf club dinners, and family calls. It meant he had watched his mother construct a public lie around my body and had decided his comfort mattered more than my dignity. That knowledge changed the shape of his face. I could still recognize the man I had married, but I could no longer pretend I knew him. Daniel promised he would speak to her after the party. I told him the party was over for me. I drove home alone through cold October rain. Messages arrived from relatives offering prayers, remedies, adoption contacts, and carefully disguised advice about setting Daniel free. At a red light, I turned the phone face down. I did not cry until I reached our driveway. Marianne had not invented the story alone. Daniel had supplied the silence that made it believable. Inside, I found a cream envelope on the kitchen counter. It was from the fertility clinic. I had almost canceled treatment after Daniel delayed his procedure twice, but 3 weeks earlier, he had finally gone through with it. The retrieval had been successful. We had created 4 embryos. 1 had been transferred 12 days before the anniversary dinner. The envelope contained instructions for my blood test the next morning. I sat at the kitchen island beneath the light Daniel always forgot to turn off. Outside, rain ran down the windows in crooked lines. Marianne had just told everyone I would never have a child. Daniel had let her. And somewhere inside me, too small to be seen, there might already have been a life neither of them deserved to use as proof of anything. I decided then that no matter what the test showed, I would never again protect someone who stood quietly while I was being destroyed. Daniel returned after midnight. He moved through the kitchen carefully, as if quiet footsteps could make the evening less real. I was still at the island with the clinic envelope in front of me. He said Marianne had been emotional. He said she had misunderstood a private conversation. He said his father had spoken to her. Every sentence reduced what she had done into an accident. I asked whether he had corrected the guests after I left. He looked toward the hallway. That answer hurt more than the speech. He had not told them my tests were normal. He had not admitted that the medical issue was his. He had not even said his mother was wrong. He had simply asked everyone to continue dinner while I drove home beneath a storm of messages. I asked for his phone. He refused at first, then called the request controlling. I reminded him that my medical history had become entertainment for 43 people because of something he claimed his mother had misunderstood. If he wanted me to believe him, I needed to see the conversation. He unlocked the phone but held it in his hand. That small act told me there was more. The messages with Marianne began months earlier. Some looked harmless. She asked about appointments. Daniel said the process was stressful. She asked whether I had caused the delays. He replied that he did not want to discuss details. Then I found the sentence that explained everything. Marianne had written, "If Claire is the problem, you are not obligated to sacrifice your entire future." Daniel had answered, "Please don't say anything yet." Not, "Claire is not the problem," not, "You are wrong," not even, "This is private." He had accepted the premise and objected only to the timing. Further down, Marianne mentioned a woman named Elise. I knew the name. Elise had dated Daniel in college and recently returned to town after a divorce. Marianne wrote that Elise had always wanted children and came from a healthy family. Daniel replied that he was married. Marianne answered that marriages ended every day. Again, he had not defended me. He had only stated a fact. I handed the phone back and went upstairs. Daniel followed, insisting that messages could sound worse without context. He said he had been ashamed. He said men were judged differently for infertility. He said he had needed time. I told him shame did not excuse making me his shield. That night he slept in the guest room. At 6 the next morning, I drove to the clinic alone. The nurse drew my blood. She said the clinic would call that afternoon. I went to work and tried to disappear into numbers. I owned a financial compliance firm that investigated irregular accounts for hospitals and nonprofit organizations. My job depended on noticing the discrepancy between what people said and what records proved. Somehow, I had applied that discipline everywhere except my marriage. At 11, my assistant told me a woman named Elise had called. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Elise had not asked for Daniel. She had asked for me. I returned the call from my office with the door closed. Her voice was cautious. She said Marianne had invited her to lunch 2 weeks earlier. She had been told Daniel's marriage was ending because I could not have children and refused to consider adoption. Marianne had suggested Elise contact him after things became official. Elise sounded embarrassed, but not guilty. She said she had no interest in becoming part of a married man's life. She was calling because the anniversary speech had reached social media through one of Marianne's friends, and the comments made it sound as if she had been waiting in the background. She sent me screenshots. In one exchange, Marianne told Elise that Daniel deserved a complete wife. In another, she claimed I had hidden my infertility until after the wedding. The lies were precise enough to sound sourced. Marianne had not merely guessed, she had created a campaign. I thanked Elise. Before we ended the call, she told me something else. Daniel had messaged her after their lunch. He apologized for his mother's behavior and said his marriage was complicated. Then he asked whether Elise wanted coffee. She declined. The invitation had been sent 3 days after our embryo transfer. At 2:17, the clinic called. My pregnancy test was positive. The nurse explained that the hormone level was strong, but that we needed a second test in 48 hours. I wrote every instruction on a yellow pad, though I remembered none of it after the call ended. Joy arrived first, bright and instinctive. Then fear followed because I had imagined receiving that news in Daniel's arms. Instead, I sat alone with proof of new life on one screen and proof of my husband's betrayal on another. I did not tell him. It was protection, not revenge. The pregnancy was fragile, my trust was broken, and information given to Daniel traveled directly to Marianne whenever silence served him. I scheduled the second blood test. I saved Elise's screenshots to a secure folder. Then I called a family law attorney named Priya Shah, whom I knew through work. Priya said I did not need to decide immediately whether to end the marriage. I could gather records, protect my business, and understand my options. She advised me to document the public statements and review our finances. That final instruction proved more important than either of us expected. Daniel and I maintained joint household accounts, but my company and inheritance were separate under our prenuptial agreement. When I reviewed 6 months of statements, I found recurring payments to a public relations consultant I did not recognize. The payments came from a family trust account Daniel managed with Marianne. The consultant's name appeared beneath several anonymous posts about me. By evening, the lie was no longer merely cruel. It was organized. And for the first time since the anniversary dinner, I stopped wondering how to make Marianne understand the harm she had caused. I began asking what she was trying to gain. The second blood test confirmed that the pregnancy was progressing. A week later, an ultrasound showed 2 gestational sacs, twins. The technician turned the monitor toward me. 2 fragile beginnings rested in the dark curve of the screen, measured in millimeters, and hope. Dr. Lena Ortiz, our reproductive endocrinologist, entered after the scan. She had guided us through the process with directness and unusual kindness. When she saw I was alone, she asked whether I felt safe at home. That question broke something open. I told her enough to explain why Daniel was not present. I did not ask her to take sides. I asked what information the clinic had shared and with whom. The answer was clear. Daniel had authorized his own results to be sent to him and to our shared patient portal. I had never authorized disclosure to Marianne. No one at the clinic had told her anything. Dr. Ortiz also showed me 3 unanswered portal messages. After Daniel's diagnosis, the clinic had requested records from his childhood surgery. Those records indicated the obstruction was a known risk, and that his parents had been advised to preserve fertility information for him when he reached adulthood. Marianne had signed the acknowledgement. She had known for more than 20 years that Daniel might face infertility. She had watched me undergo tests, endure speculation, and carry blame for a condition linked to a surgery she had chosen to keep secret from her son. Her speech at Harrow House was not based on ignorance. It was an act of redirection. I asked for every document I was legally entitled to receive. Daniel's childhood file remained private, but the clinic preserved access logs and my communications. I drove home with the ultrasound photographs sealed inside my bag. Daniel was waiting in the kitchen. For 10 days, he had alternated between apology and irritation. He wanted the marriage restored without the discomfort of repair. That evening, he said Marianne planned a family brunch to correct the misunderstanding. He wanted me there. I asked what she intended to correct. He said she would explain that she had spoken from concern. Concern was not correction. It was a softer label pasted over the same lie. I asked Daniel whether his mother knew about the warning attached to his childhood surgery. His face changed. He had learned about the records, too. He admitted Marianne told him after the anniversary party. According to her, the doctors had said infertility was only a remote possibility, and she had not wanted him to feel damaged while growing up. He described her secrecy as imperfect love. I asked why he had not told me she knew. He said everything was happening too quickly. That had become his favorite defense. Events moved quickly. Truth apparently moved only when convenient. Then I asked about Elise. He sat down. He insisted the coffee invitation had been innocent. He said he felt rejected and frightened after the transfer. I reminded him that I had injected hormones, undergone procedures, rearranged work, and carried the physical risk. His response to fear had been to contact the woman his mother proposed as my replacement. Daniel began crying. 5 years earlier, those tears would have moved me. Now I watched with a grief so deep it felt calm. He asked if the transfer had worked. I lied for the first time. I said I was not ready to discuss my medical information. He flinched, recognizing his own language. The next morning, Priya and I reviewed the financial records. The family trust payments led to a small communications agency owned by Marianne's friend. The agency managed reputation campaigns for local businesses and charities. An exported invoice from Daniel's email described a narrative reset for the Harrow family. The goals were simple: position Daniel as loyal but trapped, present me as career-focused and unwilling to build a family, and prepare the community for a separation. The campaign predated the anniversary dinner by 7 weeks. Marianne had not lost control during a toast. The toast was a launch event. Priya asked whether Daniel had approved the invoice. His electronic signature appeared at the bottom. When I confronted him, he claimed he believed the consultant was being hired to manage publicity around the restoration of Harrow House. He said he signed several documents Marianne sent and did not read the details. It was possible. Daniel's carelessness had always worn the costume of trust, but legal innocence would not restore moral innocence. He had signed the money away, read his mother's messages, invited Elise to coffee, and remained silent while I was publicly humiliated. I moved into the guest suite above my office. I told Daniel I needed distance and that any communication about treatment had to occur through the clinic or in writing. Marianne responded within an hour. She sent a message accusing me of abandoning her son during a medical crisis. Then she posted a photograph from the anniversary dinner with a caption about mothers carrying their children's pain when spouses refuse to. The comments filled quickly. This time, I did not turn my phone face down. I saved every word. 3 days later, a board member from the hospital foundation called me. My firm was in final negotiations for a compliance contract. He had heard rumors that I had misrepresented my health to secure insurance coverage for fertility treatment through my company. He sounded uncomfortable, but the allegation raised a governance question. Marianne's private cruelty had crossed into my professional life. I sent him documentation showing that my benefits and treatment were properly reported. Then I asked where the rumor came from. He hesitated before naming the source. Marianne Harrow. That call ended the last of my restraint. I told Priya to prepare a formal cease and desist notice, preserve evidence of business interference, and begin the separation filing. I also accepted Marianne's invitation to the family brunch. She believed she was gathering an audience for another performance. She did not know I was bringing records. Marianne held the brunch at the Harrow Family Club, a place designed to make old money look effortless. I arrived alone. Daniel waited near the entrance. He looked exhausted and hopeful, as though my presence meant forgiveness. I told him it meant only that I intended to hear his mother correct the record. Inside, 20 relatives and family friends had assembled. Several had attended the anniversary dinner. Elise was not among them, though Marianne had invited her. She sent me the invitation that morning, along with her refusal. Marianne greeted me with a kiss that never touched my cheek. She wore pale blue and the composed expression of someone certain she controlled the room. Once everyone sat, she delivered her correction. She said grief had made her speak carelessly. She said no one should judge a woman for infertility. She said I had endured a private struggle and that the family must support Daniel and me through whatever came next. It was elegant. It was sympathetic. It was still a lie. She had transformed a false accusation into a confirmed diagnosis, wrapped in kindness. When she finished, people looked at me with approval, expecting gratitude. I stood and placed a folder on the table. My medical evaluation had found no significant fertility issue. I had never authorized anyone to speculate about my health. Claims that I had deceived Daniel, refused adoption, misused insurance, or prevented him from becoming a father were false. The room shifted. Marianne smiled and said medical situations could be emotionally confusing. I continued. I explained that a communications consultant had been paid from the Harrow Trust to create a public narrative about my marriage. I read the 3 campaign goals from the invoice. Then I placed copies of the payment records, the anniversary guest posts, and the consultant's invoice in front of Marianne, Daniel, and Robert, my father-in-law. Robert read the first page twice. Daniel said he had signed without understanding it. His words sounded even weaker in public than they had in our kitchen. Marianne claimed the consultant had misunderstood her instructions. She said the goal was to protect the family from gossip. I asked how inventing gossip protected anyone. Before she could answer, Andrew spoke. He had found similar payments in the trust records going back 2 years. Some related to a former employee who had accused the Harrow Company of unsafe conditions. Others targeted a cousin who challenged Marianne's management of a charitable fund. She had used reputation work as a private weapon before. Robert turned toward his wife with a look I had never seen from him. Marianne's control depended on everyone believing each victim was isolated. The folder revealed a pattern. She changed tactics. She accused me of stealing confidential financial documents. Priya, seated at a nearby table by prior arrangement, introduced herself and explained that every record I held came from accounts to which Daniel or I had lawful access or from public posts. The original electronic data had been preserved. Marianne's face tightened. Then nausea rose through me so suddenly that the room tilted. For 2 weeks I had hidden fatigue beneath work and anger. That morning I had eaten almost nothing because my stomach rejected everything. Standing beneath the chandelier, I felt heat gather behind my eyes. I gripped the table, tried to breathe, and heard Daniel say my name. The last thing I saw before the floor moved upward was Marianne reaching for the folder instead of reaching for me. I woke on a carpet with Priya beside me and a club employee calling emergency services. Daniel knelt nearby. Someone had moved the evidence folder beyond Marianne's reach. At the hospital, a nurse found both heartbeats. Dehydration and stress had caused the fainting episode, but the twins remained stable. I told the nurse Daniel was my husband, but that I wanted Dr. Ortiz to speak with me first. The request was entered into my chart. Marianne arrived before the specialist. I heard her voice in the corridor, loud enough to penetrate the door. She told relatives that my collapse proved how emotionally unstable I had become. She suggested I had staged it to avoid answering questions about the financial records. Even in a hospital, she could not stop building the narrative. Dr. Ortiz arrived 20 minutes later. She reviewed the ultrasound, blood pressure, and lab results. Then she asked whom I wanted in the room. I chose Daniel, Priya, Robert, and Andrew. I did not choose Marianne. She entered anyway, following Robert before the nurse could stop her. Dr. Ortiz looked to me for permission. I considered asking security to remove her. Then I remembered every person she had recruited into the lie, and every message telling me to free Daniel. I let her stay. Dr. Ortiz faced the group. With my consent, she said my pregnancy was progressing normally for nearly 10 weeks. She said the ultrasound showed 2 viable embryos, and both heartbeats were strong. For 1 complete second, no one moved. Then Daniel sank into the chair beside the bed. Marianne laughed. It was not joy. It was disbelief sharpened into accusation. She said that was impossible. She said Daniel could not father children naturally. She said the timing did not make sense. Dr. Ortiz remained calm. She explained that the pregnancy resulted from the embryo transfer Daniel and I had completed together, using sperm retrieved during his procedure. The treatment dates, genetic records, and consent forms were documented. Marianne looked at me as though I had stolen something from her. Then, Dr. Ortiz delivered the announcement Marianne was least prepared to hear. The infertility diagnosis had never been mine. The identified factor was Daniel's obstructive condition, a known potential consequence of the childhood surgery documented in his records. Modern treatment had allowed us to create embryos, but no responsible physician had ever told anyone that I could not have children. The room became still again. Marianne had spent months telling everyone my body had failed her family. Now, a doctor had explained, with careful permission and clinical precision, that her story had been false from the beginning. But the pregnancy was not the revelation that changed everything. It was Daniel's reaction. He did not ask whether I was all right. He asked why I had kept his babies from him. And in that moment, I knew the marriage was over. I told Daniel the twins were not possessions I had hidden in a drawer. They were a pregnancy inside my body, one he had helped create, and then endangered by allowing his mother to turn my health into public scandal. I reminded him that he had invited another woman to coffee 3 days after the transfer. I reminded him that he had signed the invoice for the campaign against me. Most of all, I reminded him that he knew his mother's claim was false and chose not to correct it. Dr. Ortiz ended the conversation. She said stress was not medically helpful and instructed everyone to leave except Priya. Daniel tried to remain, but the nurse stepped between him and the bed. Marianne was the last person through the door. She stared at the ultrasound monitor as if the 2 heartbeats had personally defied her. Once the room was quiet, Priya asked whether I wanted to proceed with the separation. I said yes. Ending a marriage I had trusted felt like amputating a future. I could grieve it and still know it was necessary. The hospital kept me overnight. By morning, Marianne claimed the family had been joyfully surprised by my secret pregnancy and that her earlier remarks concerned temporary treatment difficulties. She posted prayers for reconciliation. The post included no apology. It also exposed the pregnancy before I had told my own parents. That violation removed any doubt about whether she could respect a boundary. Priya added the post to our evidence file and delivered the cease and desist notice that afternoon. It demanded that Marianne stop publishing false claims about my medical condition, my marriage, my business, and the pregnancy. It also ordered preservation of communications with the consultant. Marianne responded through an attorney. Her letter described her statements as opinion, family concern, and protected social speech. It denied business interference. Then the hospital foundation forwarded a voicemail. Marianne had called its board chair the week before the anniversary dinner. In the recording, she claimed I was emotionally unstable because treatment had failed, that I had altered company records to obtain benefits, and that awarding my firm a contract could embarrass the foundation. She said the Harrow family preferred to resolve matters quietly, but believed the board deserved warning. The voicemail converted rumor into evidence. My firm secured the contract after an independent review, and the board chair agreed to identify the source of the allegation. Marianne's attempt to damage my livelihood had produced the witness we needed. Meanwhile, Andrew investigated the family trust. Robert had appointed him co-trustee after the brunch. They discovered that Marianne had categorized the communications payments as property maintenance and charitable outreach. More than $180,000 had been diverted over 2 years. Some of it funded the campaign against me. Some funded anonymous attacks against anyone who challenged her. The largest payments coincided with a dispute over Harrow House. Robert had planned to transfer the property into a preservation trust. Marianne wanted it sold to a developer owned by the father of one of her friends. My restoration had made the house profitable as an event venue and complicated that sale. Suddenly, her hatred of me had a financial shape. If Daniel divorced me under public pressure, she believed my management agreement with Harrow House would collapse. If I appeared dishonest or unstable, she could persuade Robert that my restoration projections were unreliable. The infertility story served 2 purposes. It framed me as an unfit wife and weakened my authority over the property. I had believed she resented me because I was not the daughter-in-law she wanted. The truth was colder. Control was the objective. Daniel came to my office 3 days after I left the hospital. He had received the separation petition. He brought flowers and a printed parenting plan, as though preparation could substitute for remorse. He said he wanted to attend every appointment. He wanted us to pause legal action until after the first trimester. He wanted to move away from his mother and begin counseling. I asked whether he had removed himself as a trustee from the account that paid the consultant. He had not. I asked whether he had issued a public correction. He said his attorney advised against making statements. I asked whether he had told Marianne she would have no access to my medical information. He said she was still processing the news. Every request he made required action from me. Every question I asked revealed action he had postponed. I told him future communication would occur through our attorneys, except for clinic matters. I also told him he would receive appropriate pregnancy updates, but not access to my appointments until he demonstrated he could keep information private. He accused me of punishing him. I told him consequences often felt like punishment to people accustomed to protection. After he left, my assistant brought me a delivery. It was not from Daniel. It was a small cedar box sent by Elise. Inside was a flash drive and a note explaining that Marianne had continued contacting her. Elise had saved the messages in case I needed them. The drive held audio from a lunch Marianne believed was private. In the recording, Marianne admitted she knew the medical problem was Daniel's. She said no one would ever need to know because people naturally blamed women. She described me as too proud to contradict the story without exposing my husband. Then she said once I was gone, Daniel could build a family by whatever means necessary, with someone easier to manage. The recording was legal because Elise had participated in the conversation and our state permitted one-party consent. I listened twice. Marianne had relied on my love for Daniel as a weapon. She believed I would absorb any humiliation to preserve his secret. She had been right for months. She was wrong now. Priya did not release the recording publicly. Evidence loses power when scattered for applause. She used it with precision. First, she sent a copy to Marianne's attorney with a request for a formal retraction. Second, Andrew provided it to the trust's independent counsel as evidence that trust funds had supported a knowingly false campaign. Third, my business attorney added it to the interference claim. Within 48 hours, Marianne deleted several posts. She did not retract them. Instead, she filed for an emergency family mediation, claiming the pregnancy created an urgent need to preserve Daniel's relationship with the twins. The request had no legal force over my prenatal care, but it allowed her to present herself as a concerned grandmother. Daniel did not join her petition, yet he did not publicly oppose it either. Priya advised me to request a temporary protective order limiting harassment and third-party contact about my medical information. The hearing would not determine custody of unborn children. It would determine whether Marianne's conduct crossed the line from unpleasant family speech into a coordinated pattern of intimidation and professional interference. The courthouse was less dramatic than television. Fluorescent lights flattened every face. The judge read more than she spoke. Marianne arrived with Daniel and Robert. She wore navy and carried no visible anger. Her attorney portrayed her as a mother who had made one unfortunate toast during an emotional family celebration. He said, "My response was disproportionate and designed to exclude a loving grandmother." Priya began with dates. She showed the campaign invoice created 7 weeks before the toast. She showed the trust payments, the messages to Elise, the call to the hospital foundation, the social posts, and the publication of my pregnancy after the hospital announcement. The timeline left no room for an impulsive mistake. Then the board chair's voicemail was played. Marianne sat perfectly still while her own voice filled the courtroom, warning that my alleged dishonesty could embarrass the hospital. Her attorney objected to portions, but authentication had been established. The judge allowed the relevant section. The recording from Elise came next. People naturally blamed women. The sentence sounded even uglier through courtroom speakers. Marianne's attorney tried to argue that the conversation reflected frustration rather than a literal strategy. Priya paired the words with the consultant's written goals. Frustration had an invoice, a budget, and deliverables. When I testified, I described the anniversary speech, the professional call, the hospital disclosure, and the repeated contact after I asked her to stop. I did not discuss Daniel's diagnosis beyond what had been disclosed with consent. I would not retaliate by violating the same privacy boundaries she had ignored. Marianne testified last. She said she believed I was planning to leave Daniel and take the children. She said the family's history justified vigilance. When Priya reminded her that she began the campaign before anyone knew the transfer had succeeded, Marianne changed direction. She claimed she feared I would deny Daniel fatherhood if treatment worked. Priya asked what evidence supported that fear. Marianne said a mother knew. The judge's expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. The temporary order was granted in limited form. Marianne was prohibited from contacting my employer, clients, medical providers, or extended family about my health, pregnancy, or alleged dishonesty. She could communicate with me only through counsel. She was ordered to remove remaining false factual statements and refrain from publishing identifying information about the pregnancy. The judge emphasized that the order did not decide future grandparent access. It addressed conduct. For Marianne, conduct had always been something other people were forced to explain. Hearing a judge name it was a new experience. Outside, local reporters waited. Marianne had tipped them off, expecting a story about a daughter-in-law excluding a grandmother. Now the public record contained the trust-funded campaign and hospital voicemail. Priya gave one sentence. The court had issued protections based on documented harassment, and I wanted privacy for a healthy pregnancy. I said nothing. Marianne's attorney guided her away before she could speak. Daniel remained on the courthouse steps. He asked to talk without attorneys. I refused. He said he had resigned from the trust and begun counseling. He had also submitted a written correction to everyone who attended the anniversary dinner. It was the first meaningful action he had taken without asking me to lead him. But action taken after legal exposure did not erase the months before it. I told him accountability would matter in our future co-parenting. It did not restore our marriage. He asked if I had ever planned to tell him about the twins. I said I had planned to tell my husband. During those early weeks, I was still determining whether he was willing to be one. The answer hurt him. I saw it. I did not enjoy it. That distinction mattered to me. Marianne used pain to establish control. I wanted boundaries to establish safety. From a distance, both could look like refusal, but their purposes were opposite. The trust investigation concluded 2 weeks later. Robert and Andrew removed Marianne from all financial authority. She had to repay the improperly used funds from her separate assets. The developer withdrew its offer for Harrow House after its connection to the payments became known. Robert transferred the property into the Preservation Trust and confirmed my company as its long-term manager. The house Marianne had tried to take from my hands became the first asset she could no longer control. She blamed me for all of it. But blame was no longer enough to change the record. At 14 weeks, I told my parents. I drove to their home with 2 framed ultrasound photographs. My mother cried before she understood why I had brought 2. My father counted the labels, looked at me, and asked whether I was safe. Neither asked what I had done to make my marriage fail. Neither treated the twins as a reason I should tolerate harm. The separation moved forward. Our prenuptial agreement protected my firm and inherited assets. Daniel's financial involvement in the communications campaign complicated negotiations, though investigators found no proof that he understood the full plan when he signed the invoice. He was careless, weak, and disloyal. Those failures had consequences even if they did not make him the architect. We agreed to sell our marital home after the babies were born. Daniel rented an apartment near the clinic. He attended parenting classes and individual therapy. He sent pregnancy questions through a co-parenting application that preserved every message. Over time, his questions became less possessive. He stopped writing, "my babies," and began writing, "the twins." I allowed him to attend the anatomy scan. Before the appointment, he handed his phone to the nurse and asked her to keep it outside. He said no information would reach Marianne from him. It was a small gesture, but it showed he finally understood that privacy required behavior, not promises. The scan revealed 2 girls. Daniel cried quietly and first asked whether they and I were healthy. Afterward, he apologized without explanation. He said he had let shame become cowardice. He had watched me carry blame because correcting it required him to admit something about himself. When his mother proposed Elise as an escape, he enjoyed the feeling of being desired instead of medically inadequate. The coffee invitation had been less about romance than reassurance, but that did not make it innocent. He said he understood forgiveness was not reconciliation. It was the first apology that cost him the fantasy of getting me back. I believed him, but I did not return. Marianne attempted her own apology through counsel. The proposed statement said she regretted that private family concerns had been interpreted as factual claims. Priya sent it back. An apology without a named action is a negotiation tactic. The civil interference claim entered settlement discussions. My financial loss was limited because the hospital foundation verified the allegations before acting, but the cost of legal review, delayed contracting, and reputational protection was documented. More important, the trust sought repayment for misused funds. Marianne faced selling a vacation property she considered part of her identity. That consequence finally produced a genuine retraction. She acknowledged that I had never been diagnosed as unable to have children, never concealed infertility, never misused insurance, and never refused to build a family with Daniel. She admitted she had contacted third parties without evidence and had authorized communications work that promoted misleading claims. The statement was sent to every anniversary guest, the hospital board, relevant relatives, and the consultant's distribution list. She was not required to mention Daniel's condition. The correction restored my name without sacrificing his medical privacy. I insisted on that distinction. Marianne had taught me what happened when private information became currency. I would not purchase vindication with the same currency. The settlement required repayment of my costs and the trust funds, plus compliance with the protective order. Marianne had to complete counseling before any supervised introduction to the children. Access would depend on the children's welfare, not her title. She signed. 3 days later, she sent Daniel a letter blaming him for failing to control me. He forwarded it to his therapist, not to me. That choice gave me more hope for our future as co-parents than any promise he had made during the marriage. At 28 weeks, I returned to Harrow House for the reopening celebration. The restoration had preserved the original woodwork, repaired the east roof, and converted unused rooms into offices for local nonprofit organizations. The ballroom where Marianne had humiliated me now hosted a scholarship dinner. Robert asked whether holding the event there would be painful. I told him pain did not make a place hers. My parents attended. Andrew and his wife came. Daniel arrived alone and sat at a different table. Marianne was not invited because the protective orders still limited contact. Near the end of the evening, Robert stood beneath the restored chandelier. He thanked the preservation team and announced that future venue profits would fund maternal health grants and legal support for women facing medical discrimination at work. He did not mention the scandal. He did not need to. The family name that Marianne had treated as a weapon would now pay for resources she had tried to deny me: privacy, credibility, and the right to make decisions about one's own body. When the applause ended, I felt one of the twins move. Then the other answered from the opposite side. For months, everyone had discussed them as heirs, evidence, leverage, or proof. To me, they were simply my daughters. They owed no one a repaired marriage. They owed no one a family legacy, and they would never be raised to believe that love required silence. The twins arrived 6 weeks later on a rainy Tuesday morning. Labor began before dawn in the apartment above my office. By the time my mother reached me, the contractions were close enough that she ignored every traffic rule she considered optional. I called Daniel from the car. He met us at the hospital with the overnight bag he had kept packed for a month. The delivery was long but uncomplicated. Amelia was born first, furious and loud. Nora followed 11 minutes later, smaller and watchful. When the nurse placed them against me, the years of appointments, injections, arguments, and public judgment fell away. They were warm, real, and entirely uninterested in the story adults had built around their existence. Daniel stood beside the bed and cried. He did not post photographs. He did not call Marianne. He asked whom I wanted notified and followed the list exactly. My parents came first. Andrew and his wife visited the next afternoon. Robert waited until I invited him. Each person washed their hands, lowered their voice, and treated the room like the protected space it was. Marianne learned about the birth through Daniel's attorney. Her first response was a request for photographs. Her second was a demand to know the girls' full names. Her third accused us of cruelty. Daniel answered once through counsel. He said contact would occur only after she completed the settlement requirements and only when both parents agreed it was safe. For the first time, he did not ask me to absorb her reaction. That did not transform him back into the husband I had wanted. It made him a better father than the man who sat silent at the anniversary dinner, and that mattered on its own. Our divorce became final 4 months after the birth. We adopted a gradual parenting schedule suited to infants. Daniel continued therapy and respected the communication plan. He paid support without argument and never used the twins to bargain for access to me. Co-parenting with someone who had betrayed me required discipline. I learned to evaluate present behavior without rewriting the past. We did not become friends. We became careful partners in one important job. Marianne completed counseling only after nearly a year. Even then, I did not rush an introduction. Her therapist provided confirmation of attendance, not a guarantee of change. Daniel and I agreed that the first meeting would occur in a supervised family center, with no photographs and no discussion of family lineage. She arrived carrying 2 silver bracelets engraved with the Harrow crest. The supervisor asked her to leave them outside. For 20 minutes, Marianne sat on a carpet while Amelia pushed a wooden block toward her and Nora studied her face. There was no dramatic reconciliation. Babies do not understand status. They respond to warmth, sound, and safety. Marianne seemed almost frightened by how little her name mattered in that room. When the visit ended, she asked whether they knew she was their grandmother. Daniel told her they knew the people who consistently cared for them. It was not cruel, it was true. Supervised visits continued once a month. When Marianne called the girls the future of the Harrow line, a visit ended early. When she questioned a caregiver about my schedule, the next was postponed. Boundaries became real because consequences arrived without debate. Gradually, she improved. I did not erase the recording, invoice, or voicemail. Forgiveness, if it came, would be private. Access remained based on behavior. My firm expanded after the hospital contract. We helped medical organizations protect patients from privacy failures, insurance retaliation, and reputational interference. Harrow House also prospered. The Maternal Health Fund paid its first grants the spring the twins turned 2. One supported transportation for rural fertility patients. Another funded legal consultations for women whose medical information had been used against them at work. A third helped families experiencing pregnancy loss obtain counseling without financial strain. At the grant ceremony, I stood in the ballroom where Marianne had raised her glass. This time, I made the announcement. I did not mention her name. I spoke about how quickly people turned uncertainty into judgment, especially when a woman's body was involved. I said privacy was not secrecy, and boundaries were not punishment. I said families were not strengthened by protecting the loudest person from consequences. They were strengthened when the most vulnerable person did not have to purchase belonging with silence. Amelia and Nora sat in the front row between my parents. Daniel sat 1 seat away, close enough to help and far enough to respect the life I had built. Robert and Andrew were behind him. Marianne was not present. She had asked to attend, but the event fell outside our visitation agreement. 2 years earlier, someone would have pressured me to make an exception for appearances. No one did now. After the ceremony, Daniel brought the girls to me. Amelia demanded the microphone. Nora wanted the ribbon from my name badge. Their laughter echoed against the high ceiling. I had imagined motherhood as a final scene. Babies in my arms, a healed marriage, a complete family. Reality was less tidy. Motherhood did not repair people. It clarified what I was responsible for protecting. Marianne's original lie had been that I could not have children. The deeper lie was that my worth depended on proving her wrong. The doctor's announcement at the hospital exposed the first lie. The twins' heartbeats, the treatment records, and Marianne's own words stripped away the story she had manufactured. But the announcement that mattered came later, through every choice I made when no audience was present. I announced that my body was not family property, that a husband's shame did not become his wife's burden, and that grandmother was a relationship, not a rank. Most of all, silence was no longer the price of loving me. On the second anniversary of the Harrow House reopening, the twins ran through the garden beneath strings of white lights. Daniel followed them with 2 cups of juice, and the expression of a man learning to be grateful for a place in their lives, rather than entitled to one. My mother sat beside me on the terrace. Across the lawn, Marianne waited with the visitation supervisor. She did not enter until I nodded. She greeted me politely and asked whether she could give the girls 2 books. No jewelry, no crest, no speech about legacy. I checked the books and said yes. The girls pulled her toward the grass. Marianne went without directing them. For once, she allowed the children to decide where the family would move. My mother asked if watching them together felt strange. I said it felt accurate. Families were systems of behavior. They changed only when rules protecting harm were replaced by rules protecting people. Evening settled over Harrow House. Amelia stumbled, stood, and kept running. Nora followed with both books against her chest. I had once believed my victory would be the moment everyone learned Marianne was wrong about me. It was not. My victory was that her opinion no longer determined what happened next.